Hello, everybody. Angela, your video difficulties are a transparent ruse. We determined last year, that you're actually a robot, and so that you're just hiding by claiming that your video feed isn't working. I'm going to do something that technical difficulties prevented us from doing, apparently. Because I wanted to give both Pete and Angela the royal treatment. So here's the march that I had queued up for you guys had you been here in person.
I don't see or hear anything.
I would agree. It's dead air.
You can't hear that?
Nope.
We can't hear anything.
Oh, that's a bummer. Well, it's the theme from Masterpiece Theater, and I actually called the props department here at the university to get both of you a crown, but the lady who's in charge of the prop department isn't very happy or helpful, so it's maybe a good thing that you didn't show up, because I wouldn't have had crowns for you to march in with.
All right.
But we're happy to have you with us online. I think I'll just throw it to all the members of the panel, and let's go with the online people first to do a brief introduction and what you do, and a short history to get us started.
Sure, I'll start. It's Pete Glerum. I'm a partner here at Castlelake, a private equity firm based in Minneapolis. We're a 21 billion AUM firm. We do aviation, we do real assets, which is real estate and renewables, and we do specialty finance, which is primarily U.S. consumer revolving credit. I graduated Whitewater in 1990 as an MCS major, thinking I would go off and program computers for a living, and my first job was in an investment business, and I got the bug of being an investor and went to grad school at night at the University of Minnesota and was able to transition into an investment analyst job. And since then, I've worked at 4 or 5 different firms in the Twin Cities, coming to Castlelake when we were founded 17 years ago. Tomorrow is actually my 17-year anniversary of being at Castlelake. And about 12, 13 years ago, I started working with the advisory board in the finance and business law college at Whitewater, and really have enjoyed coming back to the university and spending time with students. And I've been doing some mentorship work and some scholarship work, and it's been really rewarding, and love to spend time in this group talking about career paths and investing ideas and whatnot.
Sure, I can go ahead and go next. Hi everyone, good to see you virtually today. Sidney Moerchen. I graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater in 2021. I was a part of the Applied Investments program and then worked at Blackthorn Capital Management over the summer. I then transitioned into business school at the University of North Carolina, Kenan-Flagler, where I'm currently in my second year. This past summer, I spent my summer in New York as an investment banking summer associate for Morgan Stanley. Upon my graduation in May of 2023, I'll be returning as a full-time investment banking associate. So to echo everyone else, happy to be here and happy to answer any questions.
I guess that leaves me. I'm Angela Termat. I graduated from UW Oshkosh a very long time ago. That's really why my camera's off. I don't want to let you know exactly how old I am. No, I was having technical difficulties. I got my master's degree from Lakeland University. Shortly after that, I spent 17 years working at U.S. Bank on the service provider side for mutual funds and hedge funds, primarily focusing on alternative asset classes. I started working with Professor Muhammad through trying to recruit for U.S. Bank. I think I've been on the panel here every year since this finance day was started. And less than a year ago, I actually was, I transitioned away from U.S. Bank and am now working at RiverNorth Capital. It's a firm out of Chicago and West Palm Beach, Florida. I'm working remotely from my home just north of Milwaukee. We're an asset manager, just 5 billion assets under management. We focus on registered funds, alternative products, and we invest in other closed-end funds and SPACs primarily, from our perspective. And I look forward to talking with all of you today.
Angela, you are an alum of the finance day who's never missed one of the finance days. That's why I was trying to get you a crown to go along with Pete, because Pete's one of the most successful graduates of Whitewater, and I thought both of those were worthy of, regal treatment. With us in person here on the panel are Jacob Fry, Blake Bartlett, and Dan Sullivan, and I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves, starting from nearest to me, please.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jacob. So I am currently an investment banking analyst at Baird. I graduated from Whitewater in May of 2020 with an accounting and finance degree. So going into my 5th year of school, I thought I was going to be a public accountant, got my CPA, and then I met this guy, Ajay, took his applied program, fell in love with investing, especially buy-side research. So I did my 18 months in public accounting, and I just made the switch to investment banking in January of this year. So at Baird, I am in their equity capital markets group. So we work primarily with traditional IPOs. So we advise clients who want to go public via IPOs, and then we also work with SPACs that want to do an IPO. Additionally, we do traditional follow-ons for companies in the range of $500 million to $3 billion market cap. And then we also do de-SPAC transactions as an advisor and other types of financing regarding pipes and different strategic alternatives.
Hi, everyone. My name is Blake Bartlett. I am a portfolio manager and investment analyst at Schaper, Benz, and Wise. We're a smaller investment management firm based in Neenah. It's about 2 hours north of here. We've got just under $2 billion in AUM and about 300 or so clients. So primarily deal with high net worth individuals. We've got 7 portfolio managers, and all of them are actually analysts as well. So it's sort of an interesting job. You can manage portfolios and also do buy side research at the same time. So that's kind of unique. But before I started at Schaper Benz, I was a alternative investment admin at US Bank down in Milwaukee. I was working down there. I was studying for the CFA, which I just finished up this past February. So that was a doozy. But well worth it. So I just finished that up in February, and I took a job at Schaper Benz when I was a level 2 candidate as an investment analyst, and then worked there for about 1.5 years before starting to take on clients. And then I actually helped recruit Dan, so I'll pass it off to him.
Hey everyone, can you hear me? Okay, there we go. My name's Dan Sullivan. I graduated in 2020. I participated in the applied investment program with Jake. I started at Schaper, Benz, and Wise almost directly out of college. That connection was made while I was still in AIP. I work as a investment analyst, and what that kind of entails is, 90% of my day is dealing with research of the companies that I am responsible for, which is anywhere from 15 to 20, depending on, but definitely varying degrees on how much you have to focus on them. Other than that, before I went to school at Whitewater, I was a staff sergeant in the Air Force for 6 years. So directly out of the Air Force into UW Whitewater, and then directly into Schaper, Benz, Wise.
Staff Sergeant Sullivan, thank you for your service. We have a panel that's got a little bit of range in terms of seasoning, and I know it's the traditional drill to kind of ask everybody the same question, but because of that, I wanted to customize it a little bit more. I've had the opportunity to talk pretty extensively with Pete, and have heard his story in the eventual path to investing. I think some vein that I will explore with all of you is the nature of investing, or what was it that led you to get into that business. And since I'm going to lead off with you, Pete, you know, that whole undergraduate training in computer science, MIS, right? And then was it Cargill that was the first stop?
Yeah.
So you end up at Cargill in the investment arm there. And you said just now that you got the bug, but in past iterations, when I've heard you talk, you said something like you recognized that you were a cost in that organization, not a revenue stream, and you discerned that was not the optimal position. But there sounds like there was something else specific to the nature of investing that you found attractive. Could you talk about that?
Sure, and you're right. I mean, I when I became an MCS major, in 1987, when I declared that major, it was new. I always said my father couldn't have done this career because it didn't exist, and I found it really interesting. I was debating between that and doing accounting, and I was sort of like, accounting's as old as the dawn of counting numbers. And so I graduated thinking I was kind of, pardon my French, hot shit, and I had this very sought after degree. I had multiple job offers, and I go to Cargill. I moved to Minneapolis, and I land in, of all the divisions of Cargill and Ag Company, their proprietary investing business. I could have been in salt mining. I could have been in, corn milling, et cetera, and I ended up in the investment business. And two things struck me very quickly. One, I was an expense. I could be the smartest, hardest working person at that firm, but I was improving efficiency and saving them money. I wasn't generating revenue. And I had this moment that I'm not going to accelerate where I want to be financially by leaps and bounds by saving money. I need to figure out how to generate revenue. I could have quit my job that day and gone and been a consultant in IT and been a revenue generator, but generating money, basically with billable hours wasn't appealing to me. But more importantly, the bug I caught was the intellectual curiosity of investing. And it was just a much more open-ended, you come upon a thesis and you have to dive in and you have to learn and you have to learn. And I am an information junkie. And I figured out really early on that intellectual curiosity, I always thought everybody had it, but they don't. And it was a real differentiator. There was two key differentiators I had figured out. One, that intellectual curiosity. I want to learn. I want to know. I love fun facts. I love, I used to be a high yield distress trader. And I could, I'd be like, oh, see the Service Pro truck? Well, those guys are in financial distress, and here's how their capital structure works. People look at me like, how do you know that? I'm like, it's what I do for a living. But more importantly, if I have to summarize my job for the last 32 years and everything I've done, I've been an investment banker, I've been a trader, I've been a fundraiser, I've been president of a private equity firm. It's my ability to communicate and tell that story. And it's taking that complexity and that intellectual curiosity and turning it into a usable story to make decisions from. Today, I spend my time with investors, hopefully getting them to decide yes to invest with Castlelake. And we do incredibly complicated investing in very detailed asset classes. And I have to be able in an hour meeting, articulate that story so that it's interesting enough for them to go do the work and not get overwhelmed and do the easy button, no thanks. And so it's just, I never been bored one day in my investing career. I've never been in that position of like, here we go again, we're doing this. It's always something different and new. And the ability to just dive in and learn, it's just, I mean, you can hear it in my voice. I'm 32 years into this and I still love it every day. I learn something new and it's just fascinating to me. And because of that, I'm willing to do the work. It doesn't feel like work to me. It feels like fun, which is kind of a strange concept.
Pete, I couldn't agree with you more. It's, when somebody proposed me coming to Whitewater, I almost shut them down out of hand saying, I love my life. I get to, learn and solve puzzles faster than other people. And when I make the decisions correctly, then we, commit capital and make a lot of money. That's a great job. And as you said, it didn't really feel like work, and I was highly compensated for it. So Angela, I want to turn to you now and talk about your path to the business that you're in. But I want you to weave into it being a woman and a pioneer in that discipline. And, you know, you made a big change here just in the last year. What tripped your trigger there? Because I think maybe it'll help somebody down the road that's listening out in the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll answer the first part of your question. I chose the finance route in college because, again, like accounting seemed like my mom did accounting. It seemed boring. Like finance seemed way more interesting to me. And all my accounting professors were trying to convince me to do accounting because, you know, you have to take the accounting classes. And I was really good at it. I'm just very good with numbers. They make sense to me. I like that aspect of it. And it's almost comical because a lot of the finance industry is in fact accounting. Like a lot of what I do is accounting. So having that general knowledge and basis for both kind of makes you that much more valuable, in my opinion, and from what I've seen, you know, throughout the years. But I can tell you, even in my finance classes in college, I think I'm going to say maybe 25% of the students were female. And the last time I was in that room with all of you, I looked around and it was far more males and far more, quite honestly, Caucasian within the room. I think, you know, we definitely still need to continue to trend toward a more diverse group within the finance industry. You know, there's been a push in recent years to have more females and minorities on board of directors for public companies and, you know, mutual funds. There's an active push to get more diversity. But encourage your friends to come into this industry. I will say, you know, I worked at US Bank for 17 years, and there was definitely, it wasn't inherent, and it was more strategic at some point, where you actually started to hear things. There are now business resource groups for different, you know, diversities and genders and whatnot. It's definitely not even at this point. I think we're working toward that, but there are definitely opportunities for strong. You know, I always felt at US Bank that I had an opportunity to move forward, and it wasn't necessarily because I was a female, but it definitely helped at some point in my career to provide that diversity of thought, of, you know, perspective in the room in general. You know, so it's just something to consider, I think, as you, you know, are working toward different careers and companies as well. Something to just be aware of, that these things exist now in a lot of companies, especially the larger ones.
Thanks, Angela. And I'll advertise again, because there are prospective AIP students in the room with us. In the last 4 years, Megan Martin was an AIP class of 2018. She went and is an analyst on the Invesco mid-cap value team down in Houston. Sidney Moerchen is on her way to Morgan Stanley, AIP class of 21. Courtney Gents was AIP class of 22. She interned at Wasatch Global Investors out in Salt Lake City this summer and is getting her MBA at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I'm trying to do my push. I think because of there's a pretty good number of females in the audience. This is a spectacular time to be a female in finance. There's a window of opportunity here that I don't know how long it will last, but you happen to be born. You should thank your parents for that. And you're in this window. And if you're good in finance and you're willing to be a pioneer like Angela, there's a lot of opportunity. And Sidney, talk about your path to where you are, AIP, and your experience and, you know, your introduction to the business working at Morgan Stanley this summer.
Sure, yeah. So a little bit of a cheesy story on how I really got an interest in finance. So my aunt actually worked as a stockbroker when I was younger, and she actually bought me my first stock in Walt Disney World. And I thought it was really cool, and it made me really interested in how finance works. So I kind of grew up with business around me, knew that I wanted to do business for the rest of my life, knew coming into Whitewater that I wanted to do finance, but not specifically sure what type of finance I wanted to do. Met RJ my freshman year of college, and he had kind of told me about this AIP program and investing. And I was like, what does this really entail? But I was really excited for the opportunity. So joined AIP, took a Bloomberg certification course that you all may have the opportunity to take at Whitewater as well. And that really helped me get familiar kind of in the capital market space with terminals. And I was really interested in investing, but to me, I was more interested in the strategic decisions and the more transactional side of finance. So that kind of led into my interest for investment banking. When I graduated Whitewater in 2021, this was right during the heart of COVID. There wasn't a ton of job opportunity around the Wisconsin area, and I knew that if I was going to pursue investment banking to the fullest extent, I wanted to be out in New York. I wanted to be on Wall Street, the whole kind of gig that people think about when they think of investment banking. So really the next path for that for me was making that transition. What was going to help me? Was that going to be a certification? Was that going to be another degree? And kind of looking at what some of the different options were, I decided that business school was going to be the best fit for me. I could use the alumni network. I could use some of the different clubs that they have offered in MBA programs, and then continue broadening my knowledge and really showing the intellectual curiosity that Pete had touched on earlier. So I had done my research throughout the first half of my senior year of college and knew that I wanted to pursue investment banking and MBA. Went to RJ and was in his office a lot of late nights, kind of deciding what are these essays going to look like? What is scoring going to look like? What is changing my entire life to be on the East Coast going to look like? And he's a really great mentor in this aspect. So I can't thank him enough for that. Eventually settled on the University of North Carolina. They have an extensive investment banking program, very well-renowned school, for placing bankers up in New York, which was very, very intriguing to me. The culture was wonderful, very, very similar to the culture here at Whitewater, just super, super collaborative and wonderful, met a lot of great people. So ultimately ended up recruiting for investment banking through the club and was able to secure my internship with Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley is a full suite investment bank. So we're doing strategic advisory, working global capital markets, sales and trading, wealth management. Morgan Stanley really does a little bit of everything. But for me specifically in the investment banking division, I'm looking to be placed in, I'm in a generalist program right now. So what a generalist program is you're able to basically touch a few different sub-verticals in investment banking. So there's 9 different groups at Morgan Stanley. I was able to actually touch 4 of those just in a 10-week program this summer. And through that, the 2 groups that I'm very interested in now are mergers and acquisitions and financial sponsors. So M&A, what you're thinking, the buying and selling of companies, and strategically advising both buy and sell side. And then financial sponsors, you're more looking at private companies, leverage buyouts, things of that nature, which is a little more in depth. But basically had a wonderful experience this summer, kind of being able to work in a client-facing role, was able to actually hop on calls with clients, ask questions, make different materials. And what really made me fall in love with investment banking is it's so much more than just finance. You have aspects of finance, law, accounting, marketing, communication. There's so many different aspects of banking that I was enthralled by and enjoyed in my classes, in previous work, in projects. And then again, the collaborative nature, being outgoing and going out there and winning business is something that has always intrigued me and is what is exciting me so much to go back as a full-time associate.
Sidney, thanks for the compliment on mentorship. It's been a pleasure to be able to work with you like that. I will say, however, that you almost killed me this summer when you were talking about the remember the situation at Morgan Stanley, and you called me, and I was driving through the mountains in Utah, having just fly fished with my daughter in the pitch dark of night, when a large black bull walked out onto the road. We were driving on this curvy mountain road while Sidney's calling me to ask for some advice on how to proceed at Morgan Stanley. And there have been stops along the way. You were accepted to multiple schools. I told you, remember, I think you should hold out. And then you got North Carolina, and I said, this is where you need to go. It seems like it's worked out exactly the way you want it to. So I'm happy for you. Let me turn now to Jacob Fry, because it's funny. Several people on the panel have already spoken of this. Jacob was a hard case. I had to get physically violent with him because his family business is accounting. He thought he needed to be an accountant. I discerned pretty early on that I didn't think he was an accountant. I actually went to football games. He played football here at Whitewater. I went to football games with his mom and dad. Randy and Lisa tried to shield me from their son because they wanted him to go into the family business of accounting. But Jacob was already on the track to getting the CPA and Ernst & Young, Deloitte. And so he went down that path, but after, was it 13, 14 months in when you called me? RJ, I don't think I'm an accountant. And I was like, So then he made the leap to Baird in a very competitive interview situation and got the offer. And so talk about what it was that like proved that I was right. And but more specifically, the things about the job that you had that you came to the conclusion, like, I want to do something more and different.
Yeah, thank you, Audrey, for that. As Audrey was saying, my dad's a public accountant, my mom's a public accountant, my aunt's public accounting, my cousins are public accountants. So it's all in the family blood. So when I met Audrey and kind of told him my sitch before my 5th year, we really sat down and discussed kind of what would happen. And because I already, as he said, gave my soul to public accounting, I had to do at least 1 year to get my CPA certified. So basically last September, I think I have a text. I got my CPA certified, and I pretty much call him the next day and saying, hey, what's next? So last fall, I went out and did a bunch of interviews, applications across the US, New York, Chicago, Boston, Milwaukee, and just try to gauge if I was really able to have any carryover from accounting to the investment banking world. And one thing that I learned in public accounting was the thought and analysis of analyzing a company's financials is very applicable across any finance job. And what was getting me more difficult was I was getting so detailed about auditing that I knew that those skills were not going to transfer. So that's when I talked to Audrey and I said, hey, like, what's the path forward here? Should I go back to business school? Should I try to get a job on a buy side, sell side, or IB? Went through the interview process last fall, a couple of different firms, and decided to accept with Baird here in Milwaukee. That's kind of my path. Been there since January, so been about 9 months now. And it's, for accounting and finance, it's very, as everybody's been saying on the panel, it's very interesting because when you have an accounting background in finance, it does carry a lot of weight because you have a different ability to analyze data and analyze companies' financials than somebody else. But at the same time, as Sidney was hitting on, especially IB, it's so much different than just numbers. When you do a deal, it's just not putting a model together for an IPO or follow-on and valuing a company based on EBITDA margins and net cash and cash flow. It's more the legal, it's the relationship, it's the investors. And that's what I didn't know going into the business, how much different areas you would touch and how many different opportunities you kind of get to broaden your skill set. That's very applicable outside of IB too.
I guess Baird's investment banking training hasn't really, you're supposed to highlight the management and the quality of the management teams that you interface with as part of your standard patter as well. But I'm a believer in that, but be that as it may. Is there anything else? And actually, let me redirect the question because, again, like Pete, right, there was something that set, I need to make a course adjustment, right? And talk about that.
Yeah, so when I was in AIP with Audrey my 5th year, early on I really started to understand quickly kind of what was catalyst for stocks and what really investors were looking at. And at that time, I knew on a split second that like, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm good at naturally. And being able to analyze that data and being able to see how you can help. Now I help companies, but being able to analyze that data in the market and understanding what are the big catalysts that are actually moving the stories. There's always stories out in the news and what's fake, what's real. But being able to discern and be able to tell, now I obviously advise companies, so being able to tell a company, hey, this is what's happening. Your competitor priced this way, but we're going to price you this way based on X factors is really important to your clients. Because at the end of the day, I'm a glorified person giving my advice. So companies are paying for that. And the reason they're paying us for that knowledge is because we have so many different connections to investors and different companies that we can give them a competitive edge. And knowing after AIP, this was my interest, I just wanted to get into the business, and Baird gave me an amazing opportunity to start my career in Milwaukee. So I took it pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's excellent. And again, I think it sort of amplifies this intellectual curiosity thing that Pete led off with. The opportunity, and for the people in the audience, right? The opportunity to do a job where, like, if you're always like trying to figure out why is this happening or how does that work, right? If that's what you get to do for your job, it's really not like you're putting, they use terms like, work, going back to the salt mine or putting your nose to the grindstone. I never worked in a salt mine and my nose is in fine shape, right? Because the job that I had mentally challenged me every day. And if that's the case, it's a really good job. It doesn't feel like work. Blake, Bartlett went directly from AIP, well, not directly, but pretty close. I mean, you had a brief stop and then got to a buy-side role as an analyst, which is a pretty high path to walk. Why don't you talk about your, lead to the investment business?
Sure. Thanks. Yeah. So when I was in AIP the second semester, we went through the CFA Equity Research Challenge, and I had never had any experience like that before. That was the first time I really, dug in, whether it was with the team or just, late at night, sort of alone in the AIP room, just digging into a company's financials and, trying to, figure out something else that someone else doesn't already know, or we were calling some of their customers, or someone on my team had a connection with someone that used one of their products or their packaging, and so we had taken different kinds of approaches to get the information. I was like, wow, this is just so interesting. And after we went through that program and submitted our report for the CFA Research Challenge, I went to RJ. I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. Like for the rest of this is just so awesome. And so that sort of like sparked, the initial desire to work in the space. And I had really briefly after that, I had started my report for AIP, which was sort of the final one to put into the student managed fund. And I had used that report to sort of get the job I am working at now. Brought it to the interview, and we talked about it, and that was something that was a differentiator. So my advice to anyone here today that's going to be starting that process is you don't even have to do it for a class, but if you're just interested, I mean, everything we use is public information. We go pull up the company's 10K, that's all filed with the SEC. We look at their press releases. Maybe you've got some connections. You could, if someone is familiar with what they do, just give them a call and see if they have any information. Sort of put all that stuff together. I mean, we call that the mosaic theory in CFA terms. Is using public knowledge and then sort of private knowledge that's maybe not material, but together collectively that gives you a competitive edge, and you can get a sort of you can come to a better conclusion. And maybe there's some value to be captured. So, go out there, research a company, put together a report, and then you can leverage that. Whether it's for interviews or even for getting into grad school. I know that would be pretty impressive to bring so your own buy side report.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And again, speaking to this So to the audience, right? If you are hearing things that, like, I am that kind of person that I do like to try and figure things out, or I do, want to know how that works or why it's done this way, right? That's a sign maybe you should be thinking about the investment business, right? And, Blake is being humble, but Blake was a top 10% of all the test takers for CFA worldwide when he took that test. And you did 3 for 3 and passed, and now as a CFA
I had the COVID delay,
charter
but
holder.
3 for 3.
And when Blake was a student in AIP, one of the stocks that he did work on was Align, the dental, Invisalign braces company. And without prompting, because I don't like spoon feed people in AIP, Blake, of his own initiative, called like 10 dentists and orthodontists to learn about the product. And I'm like, this is exactly how you get an edge, Blake. That was outstanding work. It speaks again to what Pete was saying about intellectual curiosity and what it takes to get an edge in the investment business that can help you generate alpha. Staff Sergeant Sullivan, you want to follow the lead here and talk about your path to the investment business? AIP, again, you made a pretty big move. You were a senior enlisted guy in the Air Force and came back and were you married at? Oh no, you weren't. You got engaged after, but
Correct.
But talk about the path to the investment business.
So I guess my path started way back when I was a junior enlisted in the military. I was a vehicle mechanic, and I mean, it was just kind of night and day, kind of alluding to what Pete said earlier, where I just felt like there was something different about me. When I would talk to certain other individuals I was working with, and it was blank stare on their face, and I'm asking them what they're thinking, and their answer is nothing. And I just cannot relate to, my brain has never had nothing on its mind, ever. So it's this constant thinking, this constant, again, this curiosity, being able to look around and have this, how does this all work together? And it was just that led me down the path to, I was still 4 years away from getting out of the military when I chose that I wanted to go to Whitewater and pursue the finance course. So from that point on, it was just full steam ahead, trying to figure out how do I get to where I need to be. And I remember coming onto campus and seeing the ticker lights from the AIP room, and it was just, it just clicked there where it's like, that's where I need to be. And
he followed those lights, like a true airman. But I'll also point out that Dan is the only person so far who presented a fully bound application for the applied investment program when he submitted his stuff. And that has always stood out to me as, a lot of preparation, which tends towards success if you're willing to put in that kind of work. Mo, how are we for time? Like, what do we have left? All right, so we have 12 minutes left. I want to go through this last thing without sounding, what's that guy on the Hunger Games that, asks the contestants the question? I don't want to be that guy, whatever he is. And I hate that movie, by the way, but be that as it may. And I also don't want to ask the cliche of, Pete, if the current Pete Glerum could tell the 22-year-old version of himself a piece of, it's not that. It's again related to like critical junctures in your life, things that because for me, and I suspect you're going to say that you're of like mind in this, these things have always been like somebody's ringing a bell for me, and then it's clear what I have to do. Is there some particular thing that happened over the course of a very successful career that changed the way you were thinking about things, made you understand something that could potentially translate to people who are just starting their career And maybe this is something that the answer given doesn't pay off for another 10 years, but then they go, oh, right? Is there some piece of information like that, something in an anecdote from your life and your career?
It's a great question. Yeah, there really is. And it's those forward doors to the next thing. I remember very specifically, it took me 4 years from being the IT grad to jumping into the investment business. And I remember having these moments of like, is this my life? A little bit of the Air Force comment of, sort of that dead air of, okay, I went to college, I worked really hard, and now I have this job and I'm, paying my bills, and is this my life? And as that first opportunity opened up, it was a lot of politicking to leave the ops world and come into the investment team. But every job transition I've had until I came to Castlelake actually was a different job. So I went from IT guy to consumer finance, warehouse investor, to Wells Fargo as a corporate trust person, from there to investment banking, from there to a hedge fund, to a different hedge fund in a different role. And then I was a head trader at that second hedge fund. And then I came to Castlelake as a head trader. And that was the only job transition where I knew what to do. I hit the ground running. We were a startup, but I was like, I know how to trade bonds, I know how to trade bank debt, and I can teach people that. But then at Castlelake, I've had about 4 different jobs. And, when I remember when I moved to fundraising, I'm like, can I do this, right? It's that fear of that unknown to take that next move. And that can be debilitating to people. But it's sort of, there's a story that I share with a lot of people, and it's the sort of jumping from trapeze bar to trapeze bar. It's that hurdling between space of those 2 bars is terrifying. And you're like, am I going to make the next bar? And you grab the next bar and you're like, oh my God, it's kind of shaky. Am I going to, is there a net down there? But what you realize is that gap, when you make those transitions, when you decide to leave the Air Force and get into finance, when you decide to leave Whitewater and go to grad school in North Carolina, that's where you actually grow. And that's the cool part, because then you look back and you're hanging on the next bar and you're like, yeah, I got this. And I will tell you, with the job changes I've made over the years and the different things I've done, my fear of that gap has become less. And in a weird way, I crave it more. Like I said, I've had probably 6 jobs at Castlelake, and every time a new one comes, I'm like, oh, I'm jumping for that bar. I don't, hopefully I won't miss, and maybe I won't grab it with 2 hands. It might take me a while to get that second hand planted on it, but don't be afraid of what's around the next door. But also realize at this juncture in your life, you're accomplishing this big goal. I finished college. Now what? You got 30, 40 years ahead of you, well, in your guys' age, maybe 50, of kind of what's next. And just be open to jump into that next bar. And that's where you're going to grow and change. So take some risk and be open-minded.
If that was a good question, it was a spectacularly good answer. And I know Staff Sergeant Sullivan knows this, and as a former Marine infantry officer, the motto of the Special Air Services, fortune favors the brave, right? Or bold, right? Fortes fortuna adiuat in Latin. This is what Pete's talking about, right? The greatest things that happened to me were risks that I took and was willing to do. And, again, to snap back into what would the older version of Pete, time traveling back, tell the younger version of Pete, I think that distills down to be brave, be bold, take those risks, because you've grown a lot from them. Angela, you want to take a swing at something along those lines as a groundbreaker yourself?
I'll take 2 seconds and just completely agree with Pete on that. I was at US Bank for 17 years, and it wasn't that I wasn't like, I was slightly afraid to make a change, but I was given opportunities. So I felt comfortable there and given new roles and responsibility, and I always felt like I had upward momentum. And I was managing people. I was able to do a lot of things. I would come up with ideas and people would let me run with them because I had a proven track record. Hence, some of the recruiting efforts that we had created with Whitewater that has me on this panel today. I did make a change, and I was honestly very scared of that gap. And the me now compared to the me last year realizes that it was not that big of a deal. Like, it was a bigger deal in my head than it actually was. I'm extremely happy, and people have asked, like, oh, are you, happy you made the move? Not once have I ever regretted it. And if I did, I mean, I made sure that I left on really good terms. So if this didn't work out, I would still have a place to go back to if that was the case. The other thing that I wanted to focus on was networking. So in my tenure at US Bank, I had made so many connections just with, different advisors. I mean, we were a service provider. So I've worked through my tenure, probably 100 different investment advisors, different legal counsels, audit firms. I mean, my network within the industry is extremely large because I interacted with all these people and I left a good impression with them and kept in communication. So use your resources and use your network. I mean, I'm sitting here literally listening to what everyone else is saying. I can't see anyone in the room, but the thing that has come out to me louder than anything else is how much RJ loves all of you and is like so passionate about helping you in your life and in your career and in your education. All of that, use that. Honestly, like, your professors are your first network in this industry and they're going to help you. They're coming from different places. Use that to your benefit. Use the people on this panel. We are obviously volunteering our time because we feel strongly enough that we want to help you with this. So feel free to reach out to anyone on the panel because we're obviously putting ourselves out there for that. So if I have a separate piece of advice from what Pete said, it is network, utilize that, and utilize all of your resources, even if it's just you're questioning yourself on something and you either need affirmation or maybe a different perspective on something. Use it. Use everything at your disposal.
That is great advice, Angela, and thank you for your perception. I do love each and every one of these people that are here with us and our recent AIP grads. Sidney, kick us off with, because again, the people that are in the audience are a year behind you or a couple years behind you. You haven't swung from as many trapezes, but as Pete pointed out, like, the decision to go to North Carolina was not like an easy thing, right? And again, we had those discussions about which grad school, what's going to get you to New York, right? Talk about a little bit about that, your experience here, advice you could give these guys that are just, following in your tracks.
Sure. So to completely agree with Angela and Pete on everything that was said, but I think my two pieces that came down and what helped me were resilience and management of imposter syndrome. So I have two quick stories that I can share on that. So yes, applying to graduate school and business school was extremely nerve-wracking. You're making a huge investment in yourself and you're making a huge investment in your future. And that's something that I didn't take very lightly at all. And I wanted to make sure that I was concrete on that when I went through the process. Resilience is in the places where you're going to fail. I don't think that you can grow without failure at certain points in your career. So I can remember this distinctly. This was in the AIP class of 2020, 2021. And I think RJ knows a story that I'm going to go down here. As I was leading my team for the captain of the CFA Research Challenge, and we're getting down to the wire, and it was basically on final turns, on comments, from our mentor, from RJ. And I remember waking up to an email from RJ that I think he still has. And I have never, ever gotten a project ripped to shreds so harshly by a professor, by anyone. So I read it. We discussed it with my team, took my time to feel how I was feeling.
There were tears.
There were lots of tears. There was calls to parents. There's everything. But what it did, I took an hour or two to kind of let out my emotions and feel how I was feeling. And the next thing I did is I went into RJ's office and I was like, how are we going to fix this? What can I do? And we ended up, working hours and hours and hours and trying to perfect it and trying to make it better. And just really, that's where the resilience came in. And when I needed confidence, I would look back at that email that RJ sent me in that time of failure and I know that I can do this. I know that I can get past this. And we ended up placing like second in the competition, something I don't remember the exact, but I can distinctly remember that point in resilience that I would refer back to it and just, remember RJ's words. And that actually built my self-confidence then to lead the team and to move forward. And then the second part that RJ is kind of talking about is being on the younger side, graduating Whitewater in 2021 and coming into business school. The average age at UNC Kenan-Flagler is 28 years old. So coming in, as freshly minted 22 years old with a degree from, UW Whitewater, and I'm sitting here along with these kids that have 4 years of experience at Goldman Sachs, went to Princeton undergrad, Yale undergrad, Harvard, everything that you can think of. And, when you're sitting in that seat, it's a little hard. You're like, oh, I'm telling everybody about my background and whatever. And people are kind of looking at me and you think you're seeing things that you're not. And I remember, sitting down with someone in the career and leadership in North Carolina, as well as some of my best friends in Carolina, and them just saying, Sidney, you are in the same seat here that everyone else did. Everyone went through the same application process and you made it here. And I think that that's something to remember, especially coming out of Whitewater and anywhere that you go in finance, you made it to the exact same seat as anyone else.
And
Everyone
Whitewater
here-
prepared you for it so that you could compete with Princeton.
Exactly. Everyone on this panel is extremely renowned, extremely successful, and we're all sitting in our places because we have that resiliency, because we were able to manage our imposter syndrome, because we earned and fought for those same spots that anyone else is sitting in. So if anyone is ever trying to talk down to Whitewater, talk down to anything, just remember you are sitting in the exact same place and you deserve to be there. So never lose that self-confidence, never lose that resilience, and find ways to manage the imposter syndrome, because if you can kind of break through that, there's an endless amount of opportunities out there for you.
And I will say, just on top of that, like as a female in this industry, it's going to continue. It's not just going to end at school. It continues until, honestly, it's slowing, but it's definitely not there. So especially as a female or even as a minority, like continue to push through that and realize you deserve that seat that you're sitting in.
So when I made my change, obviously very nerve-wracking situation, but one of the close mentors in my life said, when you're in your 20s, any job, career change that you make, that you have a reason and a purpose for, the next employer will care more about that than for you sitting in a job for 2 or 3 years because that's the right thing to do. So I would say to you guys, when you get out of here, use what you leverage at Whitewater. It does prepare you for anything in the world. As Sidney, as Pete, Angela all say, you're going to be prepared. And when you go somewhere, you're sitting next to somebody who's also in the same seat as you. And if you hate something, go try something else, because I was extremely nervous. I left Deloitte, a very good public accounting firm, and went to investment banking. And I'll tell you, I got to the office at 9 o'clock my first day. By 9:05, I knew I made the right decision. It's that clear sometimes. And as Pete was saying, you have to jump. But when you jump, you're going to land. If you don't land, that's okay. Just get up.
Okay, I'll be quick with this. When RJ had mentioned that Whitewater prepares you for that, I just wanted to share a statistic that maybe not everyone knows in here relating to the CFA and the finance program. But going through the finance program at UW Whitewater will expose you to about 70% of the topics that are covered in the first level of the CFA, which is a huge head start. I don't think there's not a lot of programs that reach that level, so that's a huge head start. So I would encourage those that are in your senior academic year to take a look at that program and get started early. Even if obviously you can't have the CFA when you're applying for jobs immediately, but if you can be a candidate and have it on your resume, that shows a lot of dedication, and I think you'll learn a lot through that process.
Right. I would just kind of piggyback on what Sidney was saying, slightly on the imposter syndrome, but stick to your guns. Understand that you have an opinion and you have a viewpoint that's valid, and you're going to come into, if you go into the investment world, you're going to come into a firm with people who've been into the industry longer than you've been alive, but you have valid arguments in these meetings that you need to stand your ground, because when it comes down to it, you have a fiduciary responsibility to your clients to voice your concerns. So I would just say, stand strong in your opinions. If you know something's a fact, if you have that foundation underneath you, stand your ground, because you owe it to your clients.
Thanks to everybody that was on the panel. Pete and Angela, you are royalty, and I appreciate your participation and your generosity with your time. And for all of my former AIP students, I'm super proud of you. Keep finding a way to win is a slogan that I brought with me from the Marine Corps. Find a way to win. That's a great approach, which you're all demonstrating in your lives. And I know you're going to be just amazingly successful. So, Dr. Jafarinajad?
We're running out of time, but I want to open it up to our students in case anybody wants to ask any questions from our audience. I know if you're not super hungry, I think it's better to pick their brain.
Questions?
Hello. In the past year, the markets have obviously taken a downward swing. How has your job changed over the past year, and where do you see it in the future?
I guess I could probably start that one out. That with our firm, it's actually not changing that much in the sense that it's this 7, 10, 15-year time horizon that the last thing you want to do is be making these knee-jerk reactions in response to a market that can't figure out what it wants to do.
Yeah, I know Pete knows this pattern from the investment business, because everybody says they're a long-term investor. But SBW has stocks that you guys have owned for like 30 years, right? I mean, they're actually legitimate long-term investors, Pete. They're rarer than, frog's hair, right? And that approach, and I know on past panels that both of you guys have said, right, that especially AIP, the transition from AIP and our weekly portfolio meetings was pretty much seamless into the process of being a contributing team member as an analyst on the staff there. In some, I will answer your question in part two. I thank God that I'm not active. Well, I mean, obviously I have my personal portfolio, but I lived through the dot-com bubble and excelled during that time. I would have been several years too early because I've seen a bubble inflating the size of which I had never seen before, and I was worried about that. So I would have gotten negative too early. But again, right, in all of these things, to tie back to answers that other members of the panel have given, there's opportunity here, right? You can thrive in this, turmoil. If you take that attitude with you, again, I think that's a recipe for success. Anybody else want to add? Pete, do you want to,
Yeah, it's I live in the private markets. We actually don't really do much in the public, so we invest directly. But here's something you probably wouldn't have thought of. So I get money from large institutions, state, like the state of Wisconsin, SWIB, they would be an allocator to us. And we're getting hit with what we'll call the denominator problem. So if they say 20% of our portfolio should be in alternative investments like the funds that I raise, but their equity portfolio starts losing value, their 18% allocation moving towards 20 might just move to 20 because their stock has gone down in value. So fundraising is hard today. There's a lot of competing product. And now I've got allocators that said, yeah, I was supposed to put $400 million out this year in 3 funds. I just got pulled because our equities have lost so much value. We're over allocated to alternatives. So but on the other side of it, on the investing side, the frustrating part is this is a great opportunity for us. We just had our annual meeting with all of our investors online and in person yesterday. Once a year we do this. And we said, this is the best market we've seen for direct investing in private assets in a decade. We had this little video and it kept saying, this is our time. And it's our time. We've been able to find things to do in the last 10 years since the financial crisis. But right now, markets are opening up. Liquidity is pulling back. People are scared. All of the long-term investors, the banks and whatnot, they're sort of, turning and running. We can step in. So it's a better time for me to raise capital because I've got more to do. But I'm getting hit with the denominator. I'm still able to raise some, but it's just a really interesting time. And I look at it as we got a lot of young guys that work for us, young people, I should say, that haven't gone through their crisis yet. And I say you're a much better investor going through the crisis. And I keep telling this, like we have a couple young deputy CIOs. And I'm like, guys, this is your time to actually get the gray hair and come out of it on the other side and tell people you've been through it. Because it really does change the way. Losing money, failing, you're a much better investor as a result. And so I'm, as somebody who's in the twilight of my career, I look at it, I'm kind of excited for the younger generation to be like, this is really good experience. 10 years in a bull market makes everybody lazy.
Other questions?
To any current investors, if you had to continue investing but using only one financial metric or measure to do so, what would that be?
Cash flow.
Yep.
I don't think you're going to get many arguments from the people that are present. Didn't coach them to that answer, Pete. So I'm glad you zeroed right in on that with them.
Yep. Guys, I unfortunately need to run. I actually need to go talk to an investor. So I'm gonna.
Good luck, Pete. Good hunting.
I wish I could see everybody. And as I said the other day on the mentor program with the FMA, I will be on campus in second semester presenting at some point to a couple classes as well as the finance club. So if you're not in the finance club, you should join it. It's good. It's good to have on your CV. You get to network. So we got 800 kids in the finance major, and we have about 25 members of that club, and that's ridiculous. So let's get that membership up. So with that, I'm going to sign off.
All right, Pete. I'll take that as a personal challenge to work on that. And we're back in Airbus, so we might need to make another trip up
there you go.
to touch base with you.
There you go. All right. We'll talk to you.
All right. Thanks again to everybody. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Sidney. Thank you, Angela.